The summer sun was beating down hard on London that day. It was one of those rare July afternoons when the temperature climbed so high that even the locals were complaining. Outside Buckingham Palace, hundreds of tourists had gathered, all hoping to see the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among them was a young man from California, a tech worker who had saved up for months to take this trip to London. He'd been standing there for over an hour now, and the heat was really getting to him. His shirt was sticking to his back, and he could feel sweat dripping down his face. He kept wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, but it didn't help much. The crowd around him was packed tight. People were pushing and shoving, trying to get the best view. Parents were lifting their kids onto their shoulders. Tour guides were speaking in different languages, pointing at the palace and sharing facts about the royal family. Everyone had their phones out, ready to capture that perfect shot. The young tourist had managed to squeeze his way right to the front barrier. He was proud of his spot. From here he could see everything clearly. The guards would march right past him. He'd already taken dozens of selfies, making sure to get the palace gates in the background. His phone was almost full of photos and videos. In his hand he held a plastic water bottle. It was half empty now. He'd been sipping from it all afternoon, trying to stay hydrated in the brutal heat. Every few minutes he'd splash a bit of water on his face, hoping it would cool him down. It helped, but only for a moment. Looking around, he noticed other tourists doing the same thing. Some were fanning themselves with maps and brochures. Others had found spots in the shade, though those were few and far between. Ice cream vendors were doing great business, selling out faster than they could restock. The young man checked his phone again. Still 15 minutes until the ceremony started. He opened his social media apps and started scrolling through the comments on his earlier posts. His friends back home were loving his London adventure. They were commenting on everything he shared, asking questions, making jokes. He looked up at the royal guard standing nearby. The guard was absolutely still, like a statue. His red uniform looked incredibly hot and heavy. The tall bearskin hat on his head must have weighed a ton. The young tourist could see sweat on the guard's face, but the guard's expression never changed. Not even a blink. How do they do that, the tourist wondered, standing so still in this heat wearing that thick uniform. It seemed almost superhuman. He'd heard stories about these guards, how they trained for years, how nothing could break their concentration. Some tourists even tried to make them laugh or react, but it never worked. The tourist took another sip from his water bottle and felt a bit guilty. Here he was, wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he was still dying from the heat. That poor guard must be absolutely roasting in that uniform. He thought about offering the guard some water, but he wasn't sure if that was allowed. Probably not. These guards seemed to have very strict rules about everything. They couldn't talk, couldn't move, couldn't even acknowledge the crowd around them. The minutes ticked by slowly. The tourist's legs were getting tired from standing. His patience was wearing thin. The excitement he'd felt earlier was starting to fade, replaced by discomfort and boredom. He checked his phone again, scrolling through messages, posting another story to let his friends know he was still waiting. Little did he know, the next few minutes would change everything. The decision he was about to make would turn this ordinary tourist day into something he'd regret for the rest of his life. But right now, standing in that hot summer sun, watching that motionless guard, he had no idea what was coming. The crowd around him was getting more restless too. People were checking their watches, asking each other if the ceremony was going to start on time. Children were getting fussy. The heat was affecting everyone's mood. The young tourist looked at his water bottle again, then back at the guard. A thought was starting to form in his mind. A really bad thought. But he didn't recognize it as bad yet. To him it seemed almost reasonable, maybe even kind. After all, that guard must be so hot. Maybe a little splash of water would help. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be. The young man pulled out his phone again and started scrolling through his notifications. His social media was blowing up. Every photo and video he'd posted from London was getting tons of likes and comments. His friends were really engaged with his trip, living vicariously through his posts. But some of the comments were starting to push him in a dangerous direction. One friend had written, "Dude, you need to do something wild with those guards." Another comment said, "I bet you can't make one of them react." Someone else had posted, "Come on, where's the exciting content? Show us something crazy." The tourist smiled as he read through these messages. His friends were always like this, always pushing him to take things further. Back home, he was known as the guy who'd do anything for a good story. He jumped off cliffs into lakes, eaten ridiculously spicy food on camera, even crashed a wedding once just to see if he could pull it off. This London trip was supposed to be full of those kinds of moments. But so far it had been pretty tame. Sure, the sights were beautiful and he was having a good time, but there wasn't that one viral moment yet. That one thing that would make everyone back home say, "Wow, that's insane." He looked at the Royal Guard again. The guard was still perfectly still, sweat now clearly visible on his forehead. The young tourist started thinking, what if he did something? Not anything mean or harmful, just something that would get a reaction, something that would make a great video. His mind started racing with ideas. He could try to talk to the guard, but that had been done 1,000,000 times. He could make funny faces, but that was too childish. He needed something original, something that would stand out. Then his eyes fell on the water bottle in his hand. An idea formed. What if he helped the guard cool down? Just a friendly splash of water. The guard must be dying in that heat. It would be a nice gesture, really. Plus, it would definitely make for an interesting video. The more he thought about it, the more reasonable it seemed. He wasn't trying to be disrespectful. He was actually trying to help. And okay, maybe it would also make a great video that his friends would love. But was that really so bad? He started recording on his phone, propping it up on the barrier to get a good angle. His heart was beating faster now. That familiar rush of adrenaline was kicking in. This is what he lived for, these moments of spontaneity, of doing something unexpected. A small voice in the back of his mind was trying to warn him. This might not be a good idea. These guards are serious. This is a royal palace, not a theme park. But he pushed that voice away. He'd done plenty of crazy things before and never gotten in real trouble. This would be fine. He looked around to see if anyone was watching him specifically. Everyone was focused on their own photos and videos. Perfect. He'd do it quick, capture the moment, and it would all be over in seconds. The tourist moved a bit closer to the barrier, getting into position. His phone was recording. His friends would be watching this soon. He imagined their reactions, the comments flooding in, maybe even the video going viral. Thousands of views, maybe millions. People sharing it, talking about it. He unscrewed the cap of his water bottle. There was still a good amount of water left, maybe a third of the bottle. Enough to make a decent splash. He took a deep breath. This was it. This would be his London moment. In his mind, he played out how it would go. He'd throw the water. The guard might flinch or blink. Everyone would gasp or laugh. He'd get his video. And then everything would go back to normal. Simple. Harmless. Fun. What he didn't consider was that this guard represented something much bigger than himself. This wasn't just a person in a costume. This was a trained soldier, serving his country, performing a duty that went back centuries. This uniform represented the crown, the nation, a tradition that demanded respect. But the tourist didn't think about any of that. He was just thinking about the video, the views, the likes. He was thinking about being the guy who did something bold at Buckingham Palace. He positioned himself, water bottle ready. The guard was just a few feet away, still completely motionless. The tourist's finger hovered over his phone screen, making sure it was recording properly. This was it. No turning back now. He lifted the water bottle, aimed it at the guard's face, and made a decision that would change everything. A decision that seemed so small in the moment but would have consequences bigger than he could possibly imagine. In 3 seconds, his entire life was about to fall apart. But right now, standing there with that water bottle raised, he felt excited. He felt like he was about to create the perfect viral moment. He had no idea how wrong he was. The water left the bottle in one quick motion. It flew through the air for just a split second before hitting its target. The splash was bigger than the young tourist expected. Water hit the royal guard directly in the face, running down his cheeks, soaking into his red uniform collar, and dripping onto his perfectly polished boots. For a moment that felt frozen in time, nothing happened. The guard's face was wet. Water was still dripping from his chin, but his expression didn't change. Not immediately. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stood there, now soaking wet, maintaining that same rigid posture. The tourist stood there with an uncertain smile on his face, water bottle still in his hand, phone still recording. He was waiting for something to happen. A laugh from the crowd, maybe, or the guard wiping his face, something that would make this seem like the fun moment he'd imagined. Instead, something else happened, something he wasn't prepared for. The crowd went completely silent. It was eerie, actually. Hundreds of people who had been chattering and laughing just seconds ago suddenly stopped. The silence spread like a wave through the crowd, person by person realizing what had just happened. Then came the gasps. Sharp intakes of breath from people all around him. He heard someone say, "Oh my God," in a shocked whisper. Another person said something in French that sounded disapproving. A mother nearby pulled her child closer, as if protecting them from what was about to happen. The tourist's smile started to fade. This wasn't the reaction he expected. People weren't laughing. They weren't impressed. They were shocked. And not in a good way. Then he looked back at the guard. Really looked at him. And what he saw in those eyes made his stomach drop. The guard's face was still expressionless, but his eyes had locked onto the tourist. And in those eyes there was something that made the young man's blood run cold. It wasn't anger exactly. It was worse than anger. It was a cold professional assessment. The guard was looking at him the way a soldier looks at a threat, the way someone looks at a problem that needs to be dealt with. There was no emotion in it, which somehow made it more terrifying. The tourist suddenly realized he'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't funny. This wasn't entertaining. This was serious. Very serious. He watched as the guard's hand moved slightly, just a tiny movement that broke his otherwise perfect stillness. The guard was pressing something, talking quietly into a radio that the tourist hadn't even noticed before. He was reporting the incident, right now. In real time, the tourist's heart started pounding. Wait, he wanted to say. It was just a joke. Just water. I didn't mean anything by it. But the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't speak. He just stood there frozen, watching everything unfold. Around him, people were pulling out their phones. Not to take pictures of the palace or the ceremony. To take pictures of him. To record him. He could see dozens of cameras pointed in his direction. He could hear the clicks of camera shutters, the beeps of phones starting video recordings. He was becoming the center of attention, but not in the way he'd wanted. People were looking at him with disgust, with disapproval. Some were shaking their heads. Others were talking to each other, pointing at him. Their expressions making it clear they thought he was an idiot. The guard he'd splashed was still looking at him. Still completely still except for that hand on his radio. The water was still dripping from his uniform, but the guard hadn't moved to wipe it away. He just stood there, wet and dignified, while the tourist squirmed under his gaze. Then the tourist noticed movement in his peripheral vision. 2 police officers were walking toward him. Not running, but walking with purpose. Their faces were serious. Their hands were on their belts near their equipment. They were looking straight at him. His mouth went dry. This was really happening. He was really in trouble. This wasn't going to end with a warning or a laugh. This was serious. He tried to back away, but the crowd behind him had closed in. People had moved back, creating a circle of empty space around him. No one wanted to be associated with what he'd done. He was alone now, completely exposed with nowhere to go. It was just water, he said weakly to no one in particular. But his voice was barely a whisper, and no one seemed to care about his excuse. The officers were getting closer. 20 feet away now, 15, 10. Their eyes never left him. One of them was talking into his own radio, probably calling for backup or reporting the situation. The tourist looked at his phone, still recording all of this. His hand was shaking. Should he stop the video? Should he turn off his phone? Would that make things worse? His mind was racing, but he couldn't think clearly. Panic was setting in. He looked back at the guard one more time. The guard was still staring at him with those cold, professional eyes. The tourist wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this right. But he knew it was too late for that. The damage was done. The water on the guard's uniform was already starting to dry in the hot sun, but the memory of what had just happened would last much longer. The phones recording him would upload those videos. Those images would spread, and his life as he knew it was about to change completely. The officers were right there now, just a few feet away. The tourist could see their name badges, could see the equipment on their belts. This was real. This was actually happening. And in that moment, standing there with hundreds of strangers watching him, with police officers closing in, with his phone still recording his own downfall, the tourist finally understood the full weight of what he'd done. But it was too late. Way too late. The first police officer reached the tourist in seconds. His voice was firm and clear, cutting through the silent crowd. "Sir, stay exactly where you are. Don't move." The young man's legs felt like jelly. He nodded, unable to speak. His throat had gone completely dry. The water bottle slipped from his hand and clattered to the ground, rolling a few feet before stopping. He didn't even think to pick it up. The second officer moved to his other side. They were positioned in a way that made it impossible for him to run. Not that he would have tried. Where would he even go? He was surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, all with their cameras pointed at him. "Can you tell me what just happened here?" the first officer asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew exactly what had happened. He'd probably seen it himself or had been radioed the details. The tourist's mouth opened and closed a few times before words came out. I just threw some water. It was hot and I thought it would help cool him down. It was supposed to be nice, you know, like helping." Even as he said the words, he realized how stupid they sounded. The officer's expressions didn't change. They weren't buying it. Why would they? Nobody watching would believe that excuse either. "I need you to come with us, sir," the first officer said, his hand now on the tourist's arm, not roughly but firmly. There was no room for argument in his tone. "Wait, what? Come where? I didn't do anything seriously wrong." The panic in the tourist's voice was obvious now. It was just water. Just a joke. The second officer stepped closer. "Sir, you've just assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard. You've also created a security incident at a royal palace. This is being taken very seriously. Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. Assault? Security incident?" The words hit the tourist like a punch to the gut. Those were serious words. Criminal words. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't a fun story to tell his friends. This was real trouble. Behind the officers, he could see more security personnel arriving. Some were in regular police uniforms, others in different official-looking outfits. They were creating a perimeter, moving tourists back, establishing control of the situation. This was becoming a big deal. Much bigger than he'd imagined possible. The guard he'd splashed was finally being relieved by another guard. 2 officers were escorting him away, probably to get him dried off and changed. Even as he walked away, the guard maintained his perfect posture, his dignity intact despite being soaking wet. The tourist felt a wave of shame watching him go. "Please, can we just talk about this?" The tourist tried again. "I'll apologize. I'll pay for dry cleaning or whatever. This doesn't need to be a huge thing." The first officer shook his head. "It's already a huge thing, sir. Now let's go. We have a car waiting." The crowd parted as the officers began walking the tourist away from the palace barriers. Everyone was staring. Some people looked sympathetic, but most looked judgmental or angry. He could hear whispers and comments in different languages as he passed. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, tugged on her father's sleeve and asked loudly, "Daddy, why is that man being arrested?" The father's response was quiet, but the tourist caught the word disrespectful. The child's confused face would stick in his memory for a long time. They walked him through a side gate he hadn't even noticed before. It led to a service area behind the palace, away from the main tourist section. There were official vehicles parked here, and several more security personnel standing around, all of whom turned to look as they approached. The tourist's phone was still in his pocket, and he could feel it buzzing repeatedly. Probably his friends commenting on his earlier posts, or maybe his social media blowing up with notifications. He had no idea that his video had already been shared by someone in the crowd and was starting to spread online. They reached an unmarked police car. One officer opened the back door while the other guided the tourist's head down as he got in, just like in the movies. It was such a surreal moment that part of his brain still couldn't accept this was really happening to him. The car door closed, and suddenly he was sealed inside. The officers got in the front seats. Nobody said anything. The engine started and they began driving away from the palace. The tourist looked out the window, watching London pass by. Streets he'd walked down just hours ago, excited and happy. Landmarks he'd photographed. It all looked different now. Threatening somehow. He wasn't a tourist anymore. He was a suspect. His hands were shaking. He clasped them together to try to stop the trembling, but it didn't help. His mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Just an hour ago, he'd been standing in line at Buckingham Palace, excited to see the ceremony. He'd been thinking about where to eat dinner later, what other sights to see in London. He'd been a normal tourist having a normal day. Now he was in the back of a police car being driven to who knows where, facing charges he didn't fully understand yet. His perfect London trip had become a nightmare in the span of about 3 minutes. The officer in the passenger seat turned around. "When we get to the station, you'll be processed and formally charged. You'll have a chance to make a phone call. Do you have anyone in London who can help you?" The tourist shook his head. He was traveling alone. His friends were all back in California. His family was back home. He was completely alone in a foreign country, facing legal trouble he'd brought entirely upon himself. "You might want to think about getting a lawyer," the officer continued. "This isn't something that's just going to go away with an apology. A lawyer. Criminal charges, court." These words swirled around in the tourist's head. This was supposed to be a vacation. This was supposed to be fun. How had a simple splash of water turned into all of this? The car pulled into an underground parking area beneath a police station. The tourist's heart sank even further. This was really happening. There was no waking up from this. No going back. He'd made a stupid choice, and now he was going to face the consequences. As the officers opened the car door and helped him out, one thought kept repeating in his mind. "I wish I could go back. I wish I could take it back. I wish I'd never done it, but wishes don't change reality." And reality was about to get much, much worse. The inside of the police station was cold and sterile. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look harsh and unwelcoming. The tourist was led down a long corridor, past several closed doors until they reached a small room with a table and a few chairs. "Sit," one of the officers instructed, pointing to a chair. The tourist sat down, his legs grateful for the chance to stop shaking. The metal chair was uncomfortable, bolted to the floor. Everything in this room felt permanent and serious. The officers left, locking the door behind them. For the first time since the incident, the young man was alone. Complete silence surrounded him. He put his head in his hands and tried to calm his breathing. His heart was still racing. His mouth was still dry. He felt like he might throw up. After what felt like forever but was probably only 10 minutes, the door opened again. A different man walked in, wearing plain clothes but carrying a police badge clipped to his belt. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair and a stern expression that suggested he'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it. "I'm Detective Williams," the man said, sitting down across from the tourist. He placed a folder on the table between them and opened it slowly. "Let's talk about what happened today at Buckingham Palace." The tourist opened his mouth to speak, but the detective held up his hand. "Before you say anything, let me show you something." He pulled out several photographs from the folder and spread them across the table. The tourist's stomach lurched. The photos were all of him, from different angles, different cameras, some from the palace security cameras, others clearly from tourists' phones. Every single one showed him throwing water at the royal guard. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "Multiple cameras caught your actions," the detective said, his voice flat and professional. "CCTV, body cameras on our officers, and at least 20 tourist phones. So there's no question about what happened. The question is why. I don't know," the tourist stammered. "It was stupid. I wasn't thinking. The guard looked so hot in that uniform, and I don't know what I thought." The detective leaned back in his chair. "Do you understand what you've actually done here? This isn't just about throwing water at someone. That guard is a serving member of the British Armed Forces. He's performing official ceremonial duties on behalf of the Crown. What you did is considered assault on a service member." Assault. There was that word again. It sounded so violent, so criminal. "But I didn't hurt him," the tourist protested weakly. "It was just water." "Intent doesn't matter as much as action," the detective replied. "You physically threw something at a soldier who was performing his duty. You disrupted an official ceremony. You created a security breach that required us to halt the changing of the guard, inspect the entire area, and replace the guard you assaulted. Do you have any idea how many protocols you've triggered?" The tourist shook his head, feeling smaller and more foolish with every word the detective spoke. "Let me break this down for you," the detective continued, pulling out a piece of paper from his folder. "You're being charged under the Public Order Act for causing harassment, alarm, and distress. You're being charged with assault, We're also looking at charges related to interfering with official duties and potentially creating a security threat at a protected site. The tourist felt tears starting to form in his eyes. I didn't mean to create a security threat. I swear I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just wanted to get a video for my friends. A video for your friends, the detective repeated, and there was something in his tone that made the tourist feel even worse. So you assaulted a soldier for social media content. When he put it that way, it sounded even more pathetic. The tourist couldn't meet the detective's eyes. Here's what's going to happen, the detective said, organizing his papers. You'll be formally charged. You'll appear before a magistrate. Depending on how things go, you're looking at up to 6 months in prison, a substantial fine, and a criminal record that will follow you for the rest of your life. You'll likely be banned from entering the UK again. This will affect your ability to travel to many other countries as well. 6 months in prison, a criminal record, travel bans. Each consequence hit the tourist like a physical blow. His whole body felt numb. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Can I make a phone call? He asked quietly. I need to call my family. The detective nodded. You can make one call, but I need to warn you. Anything you say can be used as evidence. Be careful what you discuss. They led him to a phone in another room. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely dial the number. It was the middle of the night back in California, but his parents answered after a few rings, their voices thick with sleep. Mom? His voice cracked. Mom, I'm in trouble. I'm at a police station in London. He could hear his mother gasp. His father's voice came on the line too, suddenly alert. What happened? Are you hurt? No, I'm not hurt. I did something really stupid and I got arrested. He tried to explain what happened, but the words came out jumbled. His parents kept interrupting, asking questions, their voices rising in panic and confusion. We need to get you a lawyer, his father said. Don't say anything else to anyone until you have legal representation. Do you understand? The tourist nodded, then remembered they couldn't see him. Yes, I understand. We'll figure this out, his mother said, though her voice was shaking. We'll help you. Just stay calm, but staying calm was impossible. After the call ended and they took him back to the holding room, reality started to fully sink in. He was in a foreign country in a police station, facing criminal charges. His parents were thousands of miles away. He was completely and utterly alone. An officer came in with paperwork. You'll be held overnight. Tomorrow morning, you'll appear before a magistrate for a bail hearing. Do you have a place to stay in London? A hotel, the tourist mumbled. I have 3 more nights booked at a hotel. The officer made a note. We'll need that information. We'll also need your passport, his passport. Of course they'd take his passport. He couldn't leave the country now even if he wanted to. He was trapped here until this was resolved. The officer led him to a cell. It was small, with a thin mattress on a concrete bench and a toilet in the corner. The door clanged shut behind him with a sound that echoed in the small space. The tourist sat on the mattress and stared at the wall. The paint was chipped and dirty. Someone had scratched words into the concrete, though he couldn't make out what they said. He thought about his friends back home, probably asleep, having no idea what had happened. He thought about his job, wondering if they'd fire him over this. He thought about his parents, probably sitting at their kitchen table right now, worried sick and trying to figure out how to help him. Most of all, he thought about that moment at Buckingham Palace. That split second when he decided to throw the water. If he could go back, if he could change just that one decision, none of this would be happening. But he couldn't go back. Time only moved forward. And forward from here looked very, very dark. The lights in the cell were harsh and never turned off completely. He lay down on the thin mattress, but sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the guard's face, that cold, professional stare, the water dripping down his uniform. The crowd shocked silence. Morning would come eventually. The magistrate, the charges, whatever came next. But for now, he just had to get through the longest night of his life, alone in a cell 5,000 miles from home, paying the price for 30 seconds of stupidity. Morning came too slowly and too quickly at the same time. The tourist hadn't slept at all. He'd spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, his mind running through the same thoughts over and over. How did this happen? How could he fix it? What was going to happen to him? Around 7 in the morning, an officer brought him breakfast. A piece of toast, some eggs, and tea. He couldn't eat any of it. His stomach was in knots. The tea was the only thing he could manage, and even that tasted like nothing. By 9 o'clock, they came to get him. "Time for your hearing," the officer said. They led him through the station again, out to a van, and drove him to the magistrate's court. He was put in another holding area with several other people, all waiting for their own hearings. A lawyer his parents had somehow found and hired overnight came to speak with him. She was professional but not unkind. "I've reviewed your case," she said. "The charges are serious, but since you have no prior record, and you're not considered a flight risk beyond the obvious travel restrictions, we should be able to get you released on bail." "What happens after that?" he asked. "Then we prepare for your actual court date. That will be in a few weeks. We'll work on your defense, but I'll be honest with you. The evidence is overwhelming. We'll probably be looking at a plea deal rather than fighting the charges." A plea deal. Admitting guilt. The words felt heavy and final. When his turn came, he was led into the courtroom. It was smaller than he expected, not like the courtrooms in movies. The magistrate sat behind a tall desk, looking down at him with an expression of complete neutrality. The prosecutor read out the charges. Assault on a service member, public disorder, interfering with official duties. Each charge felt like another nail in his coffin. They showed some of the video evidence. Watching himself throw that water on a screen in a courtroom felt surreal and shameful. His lawyer argued for bail, explaining that he had no criminal history, had cooperated fully with police, and wasn't a danger to the public. The magistrate listened, made some notes, and then spoke. "Bail is granted, but under strict conditions. You will surrender your passport. You will check in with the police station every 48 hours. You will not leave the Greater London area. You will not approach Buckingham Palace or any other royal residence. Your next court date is set for 3 weeks from today. Do you understand these conditions?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said quietly. They processed his release but kept his passport. His parents had wired money for his bail and his lawyer's fees. He couldn't believe how much it was costing already, and the case hadn't even really started yet. Walking out of the courthouse into the London afternoon felt strange. He was technically free, but he didn't feel free. He had to stay in London for 3 more weeks at least. His hotel booking was only for 3 more days. He'd have to find somewhere else to stay, something cheaper because this was going to drain his savings quickly. His lawyer walked out with him. "My advice," she said, "is to keep a low profile. Don't talk to media if they contact you. Don't post anything on social media. Just stay quiet and let me handle the legal side." He nodded. Media. He hadn't even thought about that. "Has this been in the news?" She gave him a sympathetic look. "You should probably check your phone." His phone had been returned to him with his other belongings. He'd left it off since getting it back, afraid of what he might find. Now, with shaking hands, he turned it on. The notifications started flooding in immediately. Hundreds of them. Thousands. His social media apps were going crazy. Messages from friends. Comments on his posts. Tags in posts he didn't even make. He opened one app and immediately wished he hadn't. The video was everywhere. Not just his video, but videos from dozens of different angles. Tourists had posted them. News outlets had picked them up. It was spreading across the internet like wildfire. And the comments. Oh, the comments. He scrolled through them. Each one worse than the last. What an absolute idiot. Hope he rots in jail. Disrespectful American tourists at it. Again. This is why people hate tourists. He should be banned from traveling anywhere. Some comments were even worse. People saying things he couldn't even finish reading. The hatred was overwhelming. He'd become the villain in a story being shared around the world. His own friends' messages were mixed. Some were concerned, asking if he was okay. Others were clearly trying to distance themselves. "Dude, I was just joking when I said to do something crazy," one friend wrote. "I didn't mean this." News articles were calling him the tourist who assaulted a royal guard. Some had found his social media profiles and posted screenshots. They'd identified his hometown, his college. Some had even found out where he worked. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered without thinking. "Hi, this is a reporter from..." He hung up immediately. Then his phone rang again. Another reporter. He turned his phone off again. Back at his hotel, he tried to collect himself. He opened his laptop to check his email. Another mistake. His work email had several messages from HR. "We need to discuss a serious matter regarding your conduct." His stomach dropped. They were going to fire him. Of course they were. What company would want to be associated with this? His personal email was full of messages too. Some from concerned family members, some from old friends he hadn't talked to in years, probably just reaching out because they'd seen the news. Some were from strangers, and those ranged from supportive to absolutely vicious. One email stood out. It was from his boss. "We've become aware of the situation in London. Given the nature of the incident and the negative publicity it's generating, we need you to call me as soon as possible to discuss your employment status." He knew what that meant. He was getting fired. His career, the job he'd worked so hard to get, was going to be another casualty of those 30 seconds of stupidity. The next few days blurred together. He found a cheaper hotel for the extended stay. He checked in with the police as required. His lawyer kept him updated on the case, and none of it was good news. The prosecution was pushing for the maximum penalties. They wanted to make an example of him. Tourism had become a hot-button issue in London, with locals complaining about disrespectful visitors. He'd become the perfect scapegoat for those frustrations. His parents called every day, worried and supportive, but also clearly stressed. This was affecting them too. His mother cried during several calls. His father tried to stay strong but sounded exhausted. They were spending their retirement savings to help him, hiring lawyers, looking into what would happen if he actually went to prison. The court date arrived faster than he wanted. His lawyer had negotiated a plea deal. If he pleaded guilty to all charges, they'd recommend a fine and community service instead of jail time. It would still mean a criminal record, and he'd probably be banned from returning to the UK, but he'd avoid prison. "Take the deal," his lawyer advised. "If we go to trial, you'll lose and the sentence will be worse." He took the deal. What choice did he have? Standing in court, admitting guilt, hearing the magistrate read out his sentence was one of the most humiliating experiences of his life. A fine of £2,500, 100 hours of community service, a criminal record, banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years. The magistrate also gave him a lecture about respect, about responsibility, about how his actions had consequences not just for him, but for the guard he'd assaulted, for the tourists whose experience was disrupted, for the image of visitors to the UK. Young people today seem to think that everything is content for their social media, the magistrate said, that real life is just entertainment to be filmed and shared. But real life involves real people with real dignity that deserves real respect. I hope you've learned that lesson, though it's clear you've had to learn it the hard way. Every word stung because every word was true. After the hearing, his lawyer arranged for him to complete his community service quickly, so he could leave the country. He spent the next 2 weeks picking up trash in London parks, cleaning graffiti off walls, and helping maintain public spaces. Every day wearing a bright vest that marked him as someone doing court-ordered service. And every day he thought about that guard, that moment, that choice. He'd come to London for a vacation. He was leaving with a criminal record, no job, no savings, and a reputation destroyed, all because of 30 seconds, all because he wanted a viral video. The worst part was knowing it was entirely his own fault. He couldn't blame anyone else. This was all on him. 3 months had passed since the incident. The young man sat in his childhood bedroom at his parents' house, staring at his laptop screen. He'd just finished a video call with yet another potential employer, who'd seemed interested until they did a background check. The conversation had ended the same way they all did lately. "We're going to have to pass on this opportunity. Best of luck with your job search." He closed the laptop and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. This was the 8th rejection in as many weeks. Every company he applied to found the same thing when they searched his name. Pages and pages of news articles, videos, and social media posts about what he'd done at Buckingham Palace. The Royal Guard water incident, they called it. Some headlines were worse. Tourist attacks guard. American arrested for palace assault. His name was permanently linked to those stories. The internet never forgot, and it never forgave. His old apartment in California was gone. He couldn't pay the rent after losing his job, so he'd broken the lease and moved back home. At 28 years old, he was living with his parents again, sleeping in the same room where he'd spent his teenage years. The irony wasn't lost on him that posters of his youthful dreams still hung on these walls while he tried to piece together a completely shattered adult life. His parents had been supportive, but he could see the strain it put on them. His mother worried constantly. His father tried to stay positive but couldn't hide his disappointment. They never said, "I told you so," but they didn't have to. The reality spoke for itself. The financial damage was crushing. Between the lawyer fees, the fine, the bail money, the extended hotel stays in London, and the lost income from being fired, he'd burned through every penny of his savings. He owed his parents over $15,000, money they'd taken from their retirement fund. The guilt of that debt weighed on him more than anything else. His social life had imploded too. Most of his friends had distanced themselves. Some had defended him at first, but as the story spread and the backlash grew, they'd quietly stopped responding to his messages. They removed him from group chats, stopped inviting him to gatherings. He couldn't even blame them. Nobody wanted to be associated with that guy. The few friends who stuck around tried to be supportive, but even they didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone who destroyed their own life for a viral video that they did actually get, just not in the way they wanted? His phone buzzed. Another notification. Even months later, people still found his social media and left comments. He'd made all his accounts private, but that didn't stop people from finding ways to contact him. Messages ranged from people calling him an idiot to strangers offering their opinion on what he should do with his life. He'd stopped posting entirely. His lawyer had advised him to maintain a low profile, and besides, what would he even post? "Hey everyone, still unemployed and living with my parents because I made the worst decision of my life?" The worst moments were when people recognized him in public. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it was horrible. Once, at a coffee shop, someone had pointed at him and said to their friend, "That's the guy from the Royal Guard video." He'd left his coffee on the counter and walked out. Another time, at a grocery store, he'd heard someone whisper, "I think that's him," and pull out their phone. He'd abandoned his cart and left through a side door. The paranoia of being recognized followed him everywhere now. He opened his laptop again and checked his email. Nothing but spam and a few automated rejection letters from jobs he'd applied to weeks ago. He'd started applying to positions well below his qualifications, but even those weren't responding positively. His technical skills hadn't disappeared, but his reputation preceded him everywhere. One email stood out from the usual junk. It was from a crisis management PR firm. They specialized in helping people rebuild their public image after scandals. He'd contacted them weeks ago, hoping they could help. The email was a quote for their services, $15,000 for a 6-month program. He closed the email without responding. He didn't have $15,000. He owed his parents that much already. The idea of going deeper into debt just to try to clean up his reputation felt impossible. His phone rang. His mother's voice came from downstairs. "Honey, dinner's ready." He went downstairs, trying to paste on a normal expression. His parents were setting the table, and they smiled when he entered. Those careful, encouraging smiles that told him they were trying really hard not to show how worried they were. They ate mostly in silence. His father asked about his job search. He gave vague, optimistic answers that they all knew weren't true. His mother asked if he wanted seconds. He declined. Nobody mentioned the elephant in the room, the fact that this situation wasn't improving and showed no signs of improving anytime soon. After dinner, he helped with the dishes, then retreated back to his room. He opened his laptop again and did something he did almost every night. He searched for the video. It was still there, on dozens of websites, reposted and shared endlessly. The view counts had reached millions. Millions of people had watched his worst moment. The comment sections were still active, people still discovering the video and adding their thoughts. He read through the comments, a form of self-torture he couldn't seem to stop. Most were harsh, some were absolutely cruel, a few were sympathetic, people saying everyone makes mistakes, but those were drowned out by the overwhelming negativity. There were video essay channels that had used his incident as an example of tourist behavior gone wrong, social. Media experts had analyzed why the video went viral. Travel bloggers used him as a cautionary tale. He'd become an example, a warning, a meme. Someone had even made a compilation of the worst tourist moments ever, and his incident was number one. Number one, he'd achieved viral fame, just not the kind he'd wanted. He found an article from a travel magazine published just last week, the top 10 things never to do while traveling. His incident at Buckingham Palace was on the list, with a paragraph explaining what had happened and what he'd been charged with. Even months later, his story was still being used as an example of what not to do. A Reddit thread from 2 days ago had over 3,000 comments debating whether his punishment had been fair. He read through the arguments, people he'd never met discussing his life, his choices, his character. Most agreed he'd gotten what he deserved. Some thought he should have gotten jail time. A few thought the punishment was too harsh for what was essentially a harmless prank, but they didn't understand. It wasn't harmless. Nothing about it had been harmless. The guard had been humiliated. The ceremony had been disrupted. Security protocols had been triggered. And his own life had been completely derailed. He closed the laptop and lay down on his bed. Sleep was hard these days. When he did sleep, he often had nightmares about that day. Sometimes he dreamed he was back at Buckingham Palace, and he could see himself about to throw the water, and he was screaming at himself to stop, but he couldn't change what was about to happen. His phone buzzed again. A news alert. Another article had been published. Where are they now? Viral sensation stories. His incident was featured along with updates on what had happened to him since. The article was surprisingly accurate, probably because all the information was publicly available from court records and his now dormant social media. Reading about his own life in third person felt strange. The article laid out the facts: fired from his job, criminal record, moved back in with parents struggling to find employment. It was his life reduced to a few sentences. A cautionary tale wrapped up in a neat little paragraph. The article ended with a quote from a psychologist about the dangers of social media validation and how the desire for online attention could lead to poor real-world decisions. He was being used as a case study in bad judgment. He turned off his phone and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd wake up and start again. Send out more job applications. Try to avoid thinking about that day. Try to figure out how to move forward when his past was permanently documented online for anyone to find. The guard had probably moved on with his life. Probably didn't think about that incident anymore. It was just another day at work for him, another tourist doing something stupid. But for the young man lying in his childhood bedroom, it was the moment that had defined and destroyed everything he'd built. And the worst part, the part that kept him awake at night, was knowing that it would never really go away. Years from now, decades from now, someone could still search his name and find those videos, those articles, that moment. It would follow him forever, a permanent mark on his permanent record, all because of 30 seconds of stupidity. He'd wanted to create a memorable moment. He'd succeeded, just not in any way he'd ever wanted. A full year had passed since that day at Buckingham Palace. The young man stood outside Westminster Magistrates' Court one final time, having just completed his last legal obligation. The community service was done. The fine was paid, though it had taken every penny he could scrape together. The criminal record was now official and permanent. He took a deep breath of the London air. This was his last day in the city. Tomorrow he'd fly back to California. The travel ban was still in effect for 5 more years, so this goodbye to London was long-term. Part of him was relieved. He'd never wanted to see the city again. Too many bad memories. Walking back to his budget hotel, he passed by Buckingham Palace. He hadn't been near it since the incident as part of his bail conditions. Even now, with those restrictions lifted, being close to the place made his stomach turn. He could see tourists gathered at the gates taking photos, watching the guards. Everything looked the same as it had that day. But he was completely different. The flight home the next day was quiet. He had a window seat and spent most of the journey staring out at the clouds, thinking about everything that had happened. A year ago, he'd been on this same route in reverse, excited about his London vacation. Now he was returning home with nothing to show for it but debt, a criminal record, and hard lessons learned. His parents picked him up from the airport. They hugged him tight, and his mother had tears in her eyes. They didn't talk much on the drive home. What was there to say? They'd been living this nightmare together for a year. The relief of having him back on American soil was mixed with the reality that the consequences weren't over just because he'd left England. Back in his childhood bedroom, he unpacked his few belongings. His luggage was lighter than when he'd left for London originally. He'd sold most of his stuff to help pay the fine. His laptop, his watch, his camera equipment, all gone, The only thing he'd kept was his phone, and even that felt like a curse most days. He opened his laptop, an old one he'd borrowed from his father, and checked his email. More job rejections. Even a year later, even with him trying to be honest about his past during interviews, nobody wanted to hire him. The tech industry was competitive, and why would any company take a risk on someone with his background when there were hundreds of qualified candidates with clean records? One email caught his attention. It was from a small company that did basic website maintenance. The pay was terrible, barely above minimum wage, and it was work far below his skill level. But they were willing to give him a chance if he came in for an interview. He scheduled the interview for the next week. When he went in, the owner was upfront about it. "Look, I know about the incident. Everyone does when they search your name, but I believe in second chances. You'll be on probation for 6 months and I can't pay much, but if you're willing to work hard and keep your head down, we can try this." The young man almost cried with relief. "Thank you. I won't let you down." He started the job the following Monday. It was humbling, doing work that fresh graduates usually did, working for a fraction of what he used to make. But it was honest work, and it was a start. His co-workers were younger than him, but they were kind enough not to mention the incident. He suspected the boss had told them not to bring it up. Every day he went to work, did his job, and went home. No social media posting, no trying to make viral content. He'd deleted most of his social media accounts entirely. The constant reminders of his mistake had become too much to bear. His old friends had mostly moved on with their lives. They were getting promotions, getting married, buying houses. He was starting over from scratch at nearly 30 years old. Sometimes the comparison hurt so much he could barely breathe. But slowly, very slowly, things started to improve. He paid his parents back a little bit each month. It would take years to repay them fully, but at least he was contributing. He found a tiny studio apartment he could afford on his new salary. It wasn't much, but it was his own space again. The job became more stable. After 6 months, his boss took him off probation and gave him a small raise. It wasn't much, but it was recognition that he was doing good work. A few months after that, they gave him more responsibilities. He was proving himself one day at a time, but the past never really left him. Every time he met someone new, he worried they'd recognize him. Every time he applied for a better job, he knew the background check would reveal his criminal record. Every time he traveled anywhere, even within the United States, he felt anxious about border control and security. Dating was almost impossible. How do you explain to someone on a first date that if they search your name, they'll find videos of you assaulting a royal guard? He tried being upfront about it once, and the date ended almost immediately. After that, he mostly avoided dating altogether. 2 years after the incident, he was contacted by a journalist writing a piece about viral moments and their long-term impacts on people's lives. At first, he wanted to refuse. The last thing he needed was more publicity. But the journalist promised it would be a fair piece about redemption and lessons learned. He agreed to an interview, and when the article came out, it was surprisingly balanced. It talked about his mistake, but also about how he'd worked to rebuild his life, how he'd taken responsibility, how he was trying to move forward. The comments on the article were mixed, but some people expressed sympathy for the first time. One comment stuck with him. "People make mistakes. What matters is what they do after. This guy seems to be genuinely trying to make things right." It was a small thing, but it meant more to him than anyone could know. For so long, he'd only seen hatred and judgment. This tiny bit of understanding felt like a lifeline. 3 years after the incident, he got a job offer from a medium-sized tech company. The pay was decent, not what he used to make, but respectable. During the final interview, the hiring manager addressed the elephant in the room directly. "We know about your past. We've discussed it as a team. What happened was serious, and we don't take it lightly. But we also see that you've spent 3 years rebuilding your life, taking responsibility and working hard. Everyone deserves a second chance if they've shown they've learned from their mistakes. So we're willing to offer you this position." The young man had to work to keep his composure. "Thank you. I promise I'll prove that your trust isn't misplaced." Life started to feel more normal after that. He was doing work he was qualified for. He was making enough money to save a little each month. He'd fully repaid his parents. He'd even started cautiously dating again. And while it was still awkward to explain his past, he found that honesty and genuine remorse went a long way. But the lesson of that day at Buckingham Palace never left him. He thought about it often, about how quickly a life can change, about how 30 seconds of poor judgment can echo for years, about how chasing validation from strangers on the internet wasn't worth sacrificing real life. He thought about the Royal Guard, too. He'd never been able to apologize to him directly. He didn't even know the man's name, but he hoped somehow that the guard knew he was sorry, truly, deeply sorry for the disrespect he'd shown. 5 years after the incident, on the anniversary of that day, he sat down and wrote a blog post. It was the first thing he'd posted online in years. In it, he told his story honestly. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to minimize what he'd done. He simply told the truth about what happened and what he'd learned. "I destroyed my life for a viral video," he wrote. "I disrespected a man who was serving his country with honor and dignity. I hurt my family. I embarrassed myself and my country. And for what? Likes, views? The approval of strangers online? I can't undo what I did. I can't take back that moment. The video will exist forever. My criminal record will follow me forever. But what I can do is share my story as a warning to others. Social media isn't real life. The validation you get online isn't worth sacrificing your integrity, your respect for others, or your future. Think before you act. Consider consequences. Respect people, especially those serving their communities and countries. And remember that everything you do, especially in public, can and will be recorded and shared. Make sure it's something you can be proud of, not something you'll regret for the rest of your life." The post went viral, ironically enough. But this time the comments were mostly positive. People shared it with their kids. Teachers used it in classes about digital citizenship. It became a teaching moment. He'd finally gotten his viral moment. Just 5 years too late, and only because he was willing to bear his mistakes and regrets for the world to see. Years continued to pass. Life moved forward. He built a career, found love, started a family. The incident became something he rarely thought about day to day. But it never completely left him. It was always there, a part of his history, a reminder of who he'd been and who he'd become. When his own children were old enough, he told them the story. Not to scare them, but to teach them. To help them understand that actions have consequences, that respect matters, that the pursuit of attention and validation can lead to terrible choices. "Dad made a really big mistake once," he told them, "and it cost me dearly. But I learned from it, and I'm telling you so that maybe you won't have to learn the same lesson the hard way."